Talk about how this whole process came about in terms of directing this film.
Yeah, so the actual filmmaking took almost 2 years, but Giannis and I met in 2019. I was working for ESPN at the time, and they sent me to go cover his signature sneaker that was being released in Athens. So I went to Greece, which was like an amazing opportunity. I'm Greek, and I grew up in a basketball house. My dad was a college coach, so for me, it was like the coolest assignment. And I met Giannis and his agent Alex, who's also Greek, and we kind of hit it off and we stayed in touch. And then when I left ESPN in 2021, I moved over to a company called Words and Pictures. And the first day at the new gig, my boss was like, "Hey, we've been talking to Giannis and his people about, finally sharing his amazing story. Would you be interested in being involved in that?" And I was like, I mean, it's like passion project, like opportunity of a lifetime, sign me up. So that's kind of how it all began.
That's amazing.
Was there a stage though you're like, hey, like, it's gonna be 2 years? Should it be 1 year? Could it be 3 years? What was that time horizon like, or was it something once you guys were able to find a partner in Amazon? Was it something where it's like, oh, actually, we think this is the right time for this film?
Yeah, it was. It was definitely undecided when we started. We had no idea what this was going to be, a year, 5 years. When we got involved with Amazon, we had already filmed, I would say, 50% of the movie, and we had a really good vision for where we thought it was going. And they were really supportive partners, and were like, "Listen, like, we would love it to come out around, the playoffs or the All-Star game or something that makes sense, but like make sure that the film is what you want it to be." And this past August, we were in a good place in the edit, and we felt like it was the right time for this to come out. Giannis said this yesterday that like the first meeting he and I had was in Athens, and he was kind of like on the fence as to whether or not he should do this. He's like, "I'm only halfway done with my career, my story's still being written, like, why should I stop and do this now?" To which I responded, like, you can do your last dance in 20 years.
Right.
You can do the basketball retrospective about your amazing career. But this is more than that. This is your family's journey and like the immigrant story. And I think we should get that out right now because people need to hear that story. His family had never really done long form sit down interviews. So the beats of his story were, well known to NBA fans, but never through their words. And so again, like it was a lot of trust building on my behalf. Like I met with everybody and I had to explain the vision. If you notice, like every story that they relive, we relive through all four of the brothers' perspectives.
Right.
That was important to me, that this was not just his story. It was like he grew up and was playing that game in the streets, like with his three brothers. We need to hear from them as well. And I hope that made for an interesting and authentic watch, because you're hearing all of the same people who lived the same experiences telling it from their perspectives, if that makes sense.
Talk about that process, right? Obviously Giannis is in here in the room with us, but like, what were some of the things that you guys were talking about? Because oftentimes it's a lot of trust. They're going to watch cuts and they're going to give notes and they're going to say, I want more of this, and they're going to say, I want less of this. What has this been like with you and Giannis in terms of that push and pull?
I will say this, and this surprised me, is like he did not have any editorial notes. Like he put his trust in us.
That's amazing.
He was like, audiences are really discerning right now, and I don't want to feel like I'm crafting this narrative. Like I really want it to be an unbiased look at my life. And so we did fly to Milwaukee in November to show he and his family the final cut of the film. You tell a story that's as personal as this, like of course you don't want them to see it for the first time at the All-Star game and with 100 people. So we did fly to their house, and I was terrified because I was like, oh gosh, like I hope we got this right, you know what I mean? Like this is their life. And in true Antetokounmpo fashion, he welcomed me and my boss in. He offered us dinner and wine, and we sat on their living room couches. It was all of his brothers, his 3-week-old daughter, his fiance, and we watched the movie together. And I literally didn't watch like a frame of the actual film. I was watching their faces and like the laughing, the crying, and like the ultimate, like, you got it right. Even though there are some things in here that made him feel uncomfortable. He's never talked about his experiences dealing with racism as an immigrant growing up in Greece before, for example. But I appreciate that he let us go there in this movie, because I do think that audiences want the real story. They don't want like the PR version of the story.
You know, is it something that like you want to go deeper in sports? Is it that you're like, hey, like I've been in this world and now I want to go outside? But you know, talk about that where it's that this one was on the head, but how do you approach things as a filmmaker?
It's going to be hard to try to find the next thing. I'm overseeing a series, but in terms of like directing, it's really important for me to find things that like I can pour my heart and soul into. But yeah, like you said, you know, in the past, I've always looked for, you know, female-driven stories is something that I've always gravitated towards. You know, underdog stories, unknown athletes that have, you know, larger than life, almost fictional stories is something I've gravitated to. So this one was actually unique to all of that. This was definitely like the biggest star that I've ever worked with, but it ultimately is an underdog story, which kind of falls into, you know, that same theme.